Calder Myles thought he was traveling to Texas for love, but Rynlee Voss was waiting inside a trailer filled with secrets that would reveal a cousin hiding stolen identities, missing person clippings, and a trap built long before Calder ever arrived. Calder Myles had reached a point in life where everything felt like it was slipping out of his hands. At 38, carried the weight of failures that stacked up year after year until his confidence seemed to disappear completely. His small repair business had closed after months of low income, and the constant pressure had pushed his marriage into the ground. Once the divorce papers were signed, Calder found himself sitting in a half-empty apartment, surrounded by the quiet reminder that he had lost more than just a partner. He had lost the version of himself he once believed in. Days began to blend together. He worked a low-paying night shift at a warehouse, sorting packages under harsh fluorescent lights. By the time he reached home every morning, he felt like a ghost drifting through a space that wasn't really his. He tried filling the emptiness with old hobbies, but nothing held his attention. Eventually, he turned to the internet, spending hours scrolling through social sites and chat rooms he once thought were pointless. It was easier to talk to strangers than face the echo of his own thoughts. Late one night, after a long shift and a longer silence, Calder stumbled into a small online forum. Most people posted meaningless updates, but one profile caught his attention. The name was Rynlee Voss. Her page had only a few pictures, each blurry, as if taken with an old phone camera. She wore oversized hoodies and kept her face half covered, yet something in her eyes looked soft and sincere. Calder noticed she rarely posted anything about herself, but she liked stories about lonely people rebuilding their lives. He typed a short message, not expecting a response. When she replied, he felt a flicker of excitement he hadn't felt in years. She said she enjoyed late-night conversations and simple hobbies. Calder found comfort in her quiet way of communicating. She never pushed him to reveal details, but she listened when he talked about the collapse of his business and the faded pieces of his marriage. Her responses were short but thoughtful, and they made him feel less like a man falling apart. Weeks passed, and their late-night chats turned into a daily ritual. Calder would sit on his couch after work waiting for the small notification that showed she was online. She told him she lived in Texas, far from busy cities, in a place where almost no one visited. She claimed she preferred isolation because it made life feel calmer. Calder believed her. In his mind, isolation sounded like peace, not danger. Even though she never explained why her photos looked blurry or why she always wore large clothing, Calder did not question it. He assumed she was simply cautious or insecure. The idea made him feel protective, as though she needed understanding instead of judgment. He found himself thinking about her while driving to work, while eating quick meals, and even during his shift. Her presence became the highlight of each day. One evening, she sent a message saying she wished they could talk in person. Calder stared at those words longer than he expected. The thought of meeting someone new scared him, but the loneliness in his life scared him more. After days of hesitation, he asked where she lived. She sent him a location that led to the edge of a small town, surrounded by farmland and long empty roads. She told him it would be nice if he visited someday. There was no pressure, only a gentle suggestion, but it settled deeply in his mind. Calder believed this might be his chance to start over. He imagined meeting someone who understood him, even if their lives were different. He convinced himself that taking a risk was better than staying trapped in the routine that was slowly hollowing him out. Without telling anyone, he booked a bus ticket to Texas. He packed a small bag with the essentials, locked his apartment door, and stepped out into the cold morning air. As he walked toward the bus station, Calder felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He had no idea that the road he was taking would pull him into a world he was never prepared for. A world built on secrets hidden behind quiet words and blurry images. The long trip to Texas left Calder tired, but he kept reminding himself that this journey meant something. He stepped off the bus and felt the sharp sunlight hit him harder than he expected. The town was smaller than he imagined, with only a few shops, dusty roads, and a quiet atmosphere that felt both peaceful and unsettling. He checked the location Rynlee had sent him. It was nowhere near the town center. The route pointed toward the outskirts. where the landscape shifted from small houses to open farmland broken by thick patches of wild grass. Calder rented a car from a tiny office beside the bus station. The clerk barely spoke, and the silence matched the stillness of the place. As Calder drove, the town faded behind him until only empty fields stretched along both sides of the road. The air felt dry, and the heat pressed against the windows, making everything look slightly distorted in the distance. He followed the directions carefully, noticing how the road became rougher the farther he went. Telephone poles leaned at strange angles, and most of the fences looked old enough to collapse with a strong wind. The location eventually led him down a narrow dirt path that branched off from the main road. The path was uneven, forcing him to slow down as the car bumped over loose gravel. At the end of the trail stood a small trailer home, worn out and surrounded by tall weeds. The windows were covered with fading curtains, and the metal siding had patches of rust. There were no signs of other houses nearby, only silence and a faint hum from distant insects. Calder felt a nervous chill, even though the heat pressed heavily around him. Before he stepped out of the car, he sat for a moment, trying to steady himself. He had imagined meeting Rynlee many times, but none of his thoughts matched this lonely setting. When he finally opened the door, the dry wind carried a faint smell of dust and something metallic. The ground crackled under his shoes as he walked toward the trailer. He noticed a thin figure slowly stepping out of the doorway. It was Rynlee, wearing another oversized sweater despite the blazing temperature. Calder expected a shy smile or some sign of relief, but her face held an expression he couldn't read. She looked tense, almost as if she wasn't prepared for his arrival, even though she had invited him. Her body appeared fragile, and the sweater hung on her like a blanket, hiding her shape completely. Calder's eyes caught on one detail he couldn't ignore. Her chest looked flat in a way that startled him. It wasn't simply hidden beneath fabric. It looked undeveloped, almost absent, as though her body had skipped a chapter of growth entirely. The sight confused him, but he pushed the feeling aside, assuming it was related to insecurity or a medical issue she had never mentioned. She motioned for him to follow her inside, stepping back into the dim interior of the trailer. Calder hesitated, noticing the heavy chain hanging on the outside of the front door. It looked like it had been used often, not for decoration but for reinforcement. He tried to convince himself that rural homes sometimes used whatever materials they had available for security, yet something about the chain felt oddly intentional. Inside, the air was cooler, but carried a faint smell of old wood and dust. The room was nearly empty, except for several cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. Some were sealed, while others had papers sticking out of the top. A thin layer of dirt coated the floor, as if no one cleaned often. Calder noticed the locked metal cabinet in the corner. It stood out because it was the only object that looked new. Its edges were scratched, as though someone had tried to pry it open before. Rynlee stayed near the kitchen area, keeping her distance as she busied herself with small tasks that didn't need to be done. She moved quietly, avoiding his eyes. Calder sensed that she was uncomfortable, but he couldn't understand why. Her earlier messages had made her seem eager to meet him. Now she looked like someone carrying a secret she wasn't ready to share. The silence inside the trailer felt too heavy, almost unnatural. Calder walked slowly, taking in his surroundings. Every detail added a new layer of confusion. The remote location, the worn-down home, the oversized clothes masking her frame. The strange stillness, none of it matched the girl he had grown used to online, yet curiosity pushed him forward. He felt a growing certainty that something troubling lay beneath the surface of this place. Hidden in the quiet space between her fragile movements and the locked cabinet that seemed to guard more than belongings, Calder stood in the middle of the small trailer, trying to understand why the air felt so tense. The quiet inside the room was different from loneliness. It felt heavy, as if the walls held memories that no one wanted to remember. Rynlee kept herself busy in the kitchen, pretending to prepare something even though he could see she wasn't actually cooking. Her hands trembled slightly each time she reached for an object. She moved in a way that suggested she was used to hiding her emotions, not expressing them. Calder's attention drifted to the boxes stacked around the living room. Many were old, the cardboard softening at the edges, but one near the couch had papers spilling out. The papers looked like official documents. He stepped closer, curiosity overpowering caution. He gently pulled a few of them free and realized they were medical records with Rynlee's name printed clearly on each page. They described a series of examinations from multiple hospitals across Texas. The words were difficult to read, filled with medical terms, but one sentence stood out repeatedly. It referred to a rare congenital condition that prevented normal breast development and caused a number of other health issues. Throughout her childhood, for a moment Calder felt sympathy wash over him. The confusion he felt earlier about her appearance now had a clear explanation. Her oversized clothing wasn't just a preference, it was a shield. But as he continued reading, the sympathy shifted into unease. The dates on the files showed she had visited doctors in different towns every few years. None of the records seemed to belong to one consistent medical facility. It was as if she kept being moved from place to place. He looked through another folder and found newspaper clippings. Each article described missing individuals from small towns across Texas. The names were familiar. Ones Calder remembered from late-night true crime forums he used to read when he couldn't sleep. Most of the cases involved young adults who had vanished while traveling or passing through rural areas. The articles were old, but disturbing. Some included grainy photographs of the missing people. Calder wondered why Rynlee had these clippings. They didn't seem connected to her at first glance, yet her medical records were stored in the same box. A sudden creak made Calder jump. The trailer shifted slightly as if someone stepped onto the wooden steps outside. He quickly slid the documents back into the box, but his hands shook. He looked toward the kitchen. Rynlee had turned around, and her face showed a mix of fear and exhaustion. Her eyes were wide, almost pleading as if she wished he hadn't seen anything. Calder felt a cold ripple run through him. Something was terribly wrong. He tried to move toward the front door, hoping to step outside and clear his thoughts. But when he reached for the handle, he noticed the chain had been secured from the outside. The metal links hung tightly across the door, locking it in place. He had walked inside freely earlier, but now he was trapped. The realization struck him with a heavy thud. Someone must have chained the door while he was distracted. The windows offered no escape either. Thick metal sheets were screwed tightly over the frames. Calder examined one of them closely. The screws were fresh, not rusted like the trailer's exterior. Someone had put effort into sealing the place shut. His breathing grew unsteady as he stepped back, his eyes darting around the room. Rynlee stood frozen, her arms wrapped around herself. Her posture no longer looked shite, looked trapped. Calder finally understood that she wasn't the one who had created this situation. She was living inside it. Her loneliness, her silence, her unreadable expression, they were shaped by fear, not secrecy. She seemed almost afraid to speak or move, as though any action might trigger something nearby. Calder noticed another sound outside, a slow, heavy step circling the trailer. The faint shadow passing across the thin curtains confirmed that someone else was out there. The presence was deliberate, not accidental. Whoever it was had waited patiently for Calder to enter the trailer before sealing the door. The realization made his skin crawl. The medical files, the missing person clippings, the locked cabinet, the sealed windows, remote location, everything pointed to a hidden truth. He had never considered while traveling thousands of miles for what he thought was a chance at connection. He wasn't standing in the home of a girl he hoped to know better. He was standing inside a trap that had been prepared long before his arrival. And now he had become part of whatever story this place was hiding. Calder's pulse quickened as the slow footsteps outside moved from one end of the trailer to the other. Each step sounded deliberate, as if the person circling the home wanted him to know they were there. The thin walls offered no comfort. Every sound traveled easily through the metal siding, making the small space feel even smaller. Calder's instincts told him he needed to understand who was outside before he could think of escaping. His mind replayed all the strange signs he had ignored. The remote location, oversized sweaters, the sealed windows, the locked cabinet, and the medical records stored carelessly in an open box. The footsteps stopped near the side entrance that led into a narrow hallway. Calder heard the click of a lock turning. The sound was smooth, practiced. A moment later, the door opened, and a tall man stepped inside. He had a rigid posture, and carried an unsettling sense of confidence, the kind that came from someone who knew he was in control. His clothes were dirty, marked by dried mud and oil stains, and his boots were heavy enough to leave deep impressions in the ground outside. His face was sharp and sunken, as if sleep had never been a priority in his life. Rynlee's body stiffened the instant she saw him. She didn't move toward him or away from him. She simply froze, as though any reaction might draw unwanted attention. Calder didn't need an introduction to know who the man was. The resemblance between him and Rynlee, especially the shape of their eyes, gave it away. This was Silas Crowder, the cousin she had mentioned only once in passing. She had said he kept to himself and rarely spoke to people. Now Calder understood that her silence about Silas was not casual. It was fear. Silas walked across the room with slow, heavy steps, studying Calder as if evaluating him like an object. He didn't speak, yet his presence filled the room with an unspoken threat. The smell of gasoline and sweat followed him, mixing with the dusty air. When he reached the locked cabinet, he pulled a key from his pocket and opened it without hesitation. Calder's stomach tightened as he saw what was inside. The cabinet held several belongings: wallets, phones, watches, and folded clothing. None of them appeared to be Rynlee's. Calder recognized one of the items, a
wallet
that had the name of a missing man from one of the newspaper clippings. The realization made Calder feel faint. The small space seemed to shrink, pressing him between panic and disbelief. This was no coincidence. These were the possessions of people who had come to the trailer before him. As Silas sorted through the items, Calder noticed Rynlee watching him with an expression that mixed helplessness and resignation. Her eyes seemed to silently plead for Calder to understand the truth she could never express. She wasn't the architect of this trap. She was another victim living under Silas's control. Calder knew he had to act quickly. He scanned the room for anything he could use. The back window looked weak compared to the others, its frame slightly warped as if the metal sheet covering it had been added recently. If he applied enough force, he might be able to push it open. But he had to distract Silas first. Silas turned his back to them as he inspected a few objects from the cabinet. Calder took a silent step backward, watching for any sign that Silas had noticed. Rynlee understood what Calder was trying to do. Without speaking, she shifted slightly toward the kitchen, knocking over a small container on the counter. The sound echoed sharply through the trailer, drawing Silas's attention. As Silas focused on her, Calder reached the window. His hands moved quickly, trying to pry the sheet loose with whatever strength he had. The screws held tightly at first, but the metal bent enough for him to slip his fingers underneath. He pushed harder. The frame groaned, the noise loud enough to panic him, but Silas was still distracted by Rynlee's movements. The metal finally gave way, creating a narrow gap. Calder squeezed through, scraping his arms against the sharp edges. Once outside, the heat hit him like a wave, but he didn't stop. He sprinted into the tall grass behind the trailer, ignoring the cuts and the burning in his lungs. He could hear Silas shouting behind him now, the tone fierce and furious. The chase had begun. Calder pushed himself through the wild brush, stumbling over uneven ground. Silas crashed through the weeds behind him, gaining ground with each step. Calder forced himself to run harder until he reached the main road. A truck approached in the distance, and he stepped into the lane, waving frantically. The driver slowed, shocked by the sight of a dusty, injured man running out of the fields. Calder climbed into the truck without looking back, knowing that every second counted. The trailer, the cabinet, the medical files, the missing person clippings, all of it blurred together in Calder's mind as the truck pulled away. He had escaped, but the danger was far from over. Silas was still out there, and the truth hiding inside that trailer was darker than anything Calder had ever imagined. Calder stayed silent in the passenger seat of the truck, gripping the edge of the seat as the driver sped toward town. His mind replayed every second inside the trailer, unable to settle on one clear thought. The dust on his clothes, the cuts on his arms, and the dull ache in his chest all reminded him that he had come frighteningly close to becoming another forgotten name in a newspaper clipping. When they reached the sheriff's station, the driver hurried inside to report what had happened. Calder followed, still shaking from adrenaline and fear. Detective Mara Ellison was assigned to hear his statement. She listened carefully as Calder explained how he met Rynlee online. The condition of the trailer, the sealed windows, the medical records, and the cabinet full of belongings that did not belong to her. Calder spoke slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. Mara noticed the scratches on his arms and the panic lingering in his expression. She took him seriously, writing down each detail without interrupting him. When he finished, she made a quick call and ordered a small team to head toward the location immediately. By the time the officers reached the property, Silas Crowder was gone. The trailer door hung wide open, swinging lightly in the warm wind. Inside, Rynlee sat on the floor near the kitchen, her knees pulled to her chest. She looked drained, as if the fear inside her had finally collapsed into exhaustion. She didn't resist when officers approached her, but she didn't say anything either. Her silence wasn't stubborn. It was the silence of someone who had spent years being told not to speak. The officers secured the trailer while Detective Mara examined the interior. She saw the boxes, the old papers, the metal sheets over the windows, and the cabinet with its disturbing contents. Each item felt like a puzzle piece, hinting at a long, hidden pattern. She asked Rynlee to follow her outside, and though Rynlee hesitated, she eventually stepped out of the trailer as if she were leaving a cage she had lived in for too long. Dr. Nia Halberg, the medical examiner, arrived to catalog and analyze the recovered items. She carefully photographed everything inside the cabinet, collecting what she recognized as personal belongings of individuals reported missing in previous years. The dates on the clippings in the box matched several items in the cabinet, linking Silas to multiple disappearances across the region. Although no bodies were found on the property that day, the evidence was strong enough to classify Silas as a suspect in several cold cases. When Rynlee was finally taken to a safe facility for evaluation, she began to speak in short, halting sentences. She explained that her parents had died when she was young, leaving her in Silas's care. He kept her isolated and under strict control, convincing her that the outside world would judge her because of her medical condition. He made her believe she had no place anywhere but beside him. Over time, she learned that Silas used her loneliness to lure people to the property. She never participated directly in anything harmful, but she lived with the constant threat of punishment if she disobeyed him. Each visitor was told they were welcome, but none were meant to leave. Detective Mara listened with a growing sense of anger, realizing how deeply Rynlee had been manipulated. What Calder had experienced was only a small part of a much larger pattern. Rynlee's fear, the sealed windows, and the isolated trailer were signs of a controlled life, not a partnership. With a full statement from Calder and new information from Rynlee, law enforcement launched a statewide search for Silas Crowder. Days passed and tensions spread across nearby towns as Silas remained hidden. Patrols increased, and tips poured in from people who had seen a man matching his description. Finally, after nearly a week, officers located him inside an abandoned service building on the outskirts of a different town. He was tired, hungry, and cornered. Silas did not resist arrest. His silence during questioning only made the officers more certain he had been hiding secrets for years. With Silas in custody, Rynlee was placed into proper medical and psychological care. Specialists helped her understand that her worth did not depend on the control of another person. She began to rebuild her identity outside the fear that had shaped her entire youth. Calder returned to Ohio with a heavy but grateful heart. He carried emotional scars from the experience, yet he knew the truth he uncovered had saved more than just himself. The case became widely known as an example of how vulnerability can be twisted into something dangerous, and how online connections can lead people into places they never expected. Calder had traveled to Texas searching for hope, but instead he uncovered a hidden darkness and, in doing so, helped bring it to an end.